Hey everyone, today I have another album review for you, this time the algorithm Polymorphic Code. If you follow me on this channel, you're probably already aware of the fact that I'm a massive fan of this guy's work. I did an introducing video for him, which I'll leave a link below so you can get some background info on him, and so I don't actually have to talk about it again here. In short though, I found out about this guy when he dropped his Critical Error demo, which is a bananas mix of electronic music and metal. But the one difference this guy has from a lot of those other bands, such as Asking Alexandria or Crossfaith, is that this style is way more heavy on the electronic than the metal. It's more or less just electronic music, and a very broad amount of it, but there you go. So anyway, his debut album, Polymorphic Code. The album opens up with Handshake, which opens with a very short, concise and nice little ambient sound before booming into very traditional algorithm. Tons of electronics, tons of layers, tons of glitchiness. One thing that's really great is the fact that he's got recorded drums this time around. He's actually got the dude from Monuments drumming for him on a live front, and he obviously recorded this too. And it just sounds so much better. It really amps up the overall sound and feel of it. There's tons of sounds, tons of layers during this track, flying about. The song flows nicely, has a lot of great progressions. I'm just loving the mix of drum sounds, switching between electronic and acoustic as well. One thing I adore about the algorithm is his very broad use of lots of different sounds and textures, not restraining himself to one electronic genre, one genre of metal or anything like that. Although I will say the metal parts are slightly more constricted than the electronic parts, certainly. The next track, Bouncing Dot, opens very nicely with a few electronic melodies that sort of swoop in and out, building drums, and again a very nicely layered opening. Once it kicks in, there's a very glittery, bright electronic sound that sort of swoops in and out over this gent-esque riffing. Eventually a very glitchy dubstep sound sort of comes into the mix and it sort of progresses into a dancey section in a way. Again, this song is just a clusterfuck of different sounds, layers, and a very nice song structure that's surprisingly cohesive for a song this chaotic. I just want to say at this point, the drumming on this record is absolutely great. It's super tight, super punchy, and just really adds a lot of flavour to this album. I will say, if this was strictly a metal record, I would not enjoy the drums anywhere near as much. They're incredibly triggered, incredibly false and synthetic in a way, but I feel like it really works for this record purely for the reason that it's more of an electronic album than a metal album. Towards the end of this track, there's a really goofy 8-bit style synth sound that comes in. It just sounds really great. The thing I love about this guy is he manages to keep these kinds of sound from feeling silly or cartoony, or at least overly silly and cartoony. It still feels serious to an extent, and it still feels like it's part of the song and not completely disjointed or out of the air. The next track, Trojans, is actually a remastered and reworked version of an old track. It starts the same. The most noticeable difference is obviously the recorded drums, and there are some other subtle changes. Some of the synths are slightly brighter and richer sounding, still keeping to a very glitchy core sound, using tons of breakbeat, using tons of drum and bass and stuff like that. There was also actually a video to go along with this track. It's kind of an odd video. It's a little bit boring, but I won't get into that. Towards the middle there is a really nice dancey section with plenty of ambient sounds too. I love the samples in this track and throughout this album. Great drumming again on this track, really. At this point, I do have one slight gripe that I really want to point out. The electronic side is done very, very well. There's loads of different sounds, loads of different textures, tons of variation in it, lots of different styles, and all sorts of things you want to hear on a record like this. The metal sections, however, I get they're not the main focus, but they're not varied at all, more or less. There's pretty much only one track where guitars are doing something other than chugging along with the bass drum, which I'm fine with. It sort of adds because in gent you have very off-kilter, very disorientating rhythms. In this it kind of works because you just add glitches in them and it makes it feel very nice. But perhaps some guitar melodies, some solos, some stuff like that would really mix up this record and make it feel a bit bigger than it actually is, despite the fact that this record already is a huge, ambitious project. The next track, Access Granted, is actually the lead single, which is kind of bizarre because it's one of the longest tracks on the record. It opens by borrowing parts from the Access Denied track from the Critical Error demo, but it's reworked and mashed in a different way. There are a plethora of great sections and sounds ranging from dance to gent to reggae on this track. There's a very nice use of a sample towards the end that gives it kind of a video gamey feel in a way, like the 8-bit sections do. And basically the samples sort of go 3, 2, 1, fight, then kicks in, and then there's a part towards the end where it goes really chaotic, and beforehand the sample goes sudden death, which I thought was really cool, a nice little addition. The next track, Logic Bomb, really emphasises one thing I love about the algorithm, and that is his ability to just never cease to amaze me in the sheer level of detail he puts into every second of his work. Everything flows, everything forms a song, for the most part anyway, and just the amount of detail, like I've said many times in this review, that he gets into one song is just mind-boggling. The second half of this song is actually one of my favourite parts on the album. Back to the very game-tracky, 8-bit sounding synths. They're very playful and cartoony, but again, it remains sounding like a serious song and not just a game track. Not that that's a bad thing, it's just not that over the top and silly. At this point, honestly, if you like the sounds of what you've heard before, there really isn't much after this that I could say that would blow your mind. It's kind of the same to the end. Don't interpret that as a bad thing, it's not. What I mean by that is it's as varied and as bananas as the first half of the record, just more of it really. If you like the first half and what I've described up to now, you're going to like the rest of the record. I will say one thing though, I like the fact that he's managed to chuck in a StarCraft reference with Warp Gate Exploit. I will say Warp Gate Exploit though, despite the fact that I said it's all kind of the same, this track does introduce one thing new, and that's the fact that it's very mid-paced and just builds, and towards the middle you actually hear a chord progression on the guitars, not just chugging, so that's really nice. More of those please, Mr. Algorithm, I'd very much appreciate it. I'm just going to sort of jump to the last track, Panic. It's a 12-minute monster of a track that opens with keyboards and a very synthetic bass drum that kind of reminds me of 90s house music in a way, only more bass and has some interesting little layers that give it a very algorithm-y feel. To me, this track is kind of the calm after the storm, and it makes a lot of sense in context within the story. Yes, there's actually a story to this album. But anyway, the whole track is very mid-tempo, holding the main melody and going through several phases that are just really nice, and it's a really nice ending to the album. But back to the story, this is kind of the last thing I really want to address. Basically, he posted up the story of this album not too long ago, but he's taken it down now, so I'm just sort of gathering what I remember of it. Ultimately, we're the source computer, and we are attempting to hack and gain information from a destination network. The song titles kind of tell the story. We try several methods such as Trojans and a bouncing dot, hence the song names, although the bouncing dot in computer terms is actually called something else, I can't remember the name of it though. Eventually we get access, hence access granted, and after somewhat of a journey through a bunch of different songs using different methods to gain information, logic bombs for example, we realise that this is actually a trap that was set up, and this is a fake network, hence the last two tracks, Null and Panic. Overall, I love this record. I do feel like at times it's a teeny bit too much in terms of amount, however it's well written, it flows nicely, it's completely insane and unique. The only negative I have is, like I said, those gent sections. Please mix up the guitars next time, I again really appreciate it. Another slightly smaller gripe admittedly is that I felt this track was a little bit too short for what it was. It was a 48-minute monster, but I feel like if he stretched out the album to an hour and 10 maybe, he could have possibly expanded on some of the ideas he had a little bit more, which would have been nice. However, despite my gripes, this debut album is incredibly strong, and I think it's deserving of an 8 out of 10. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment and subscribe. Let me know what you thought of this album, what you think of this artist. I'll be catching him live and I'll report back on that, and I'll catch you guys and gals later.